Happy June, everybody. June is Pride Month, but Pride Month is not what it once was. Pride and the LGBT movement have really fallen into some disregard over the last few years. And because of this, the LGBT community is sending the message that this Pride Month is particularly dangerous. It's dangerous for gays. That's the message that they are promoting. That not only are people intolerant in the Trump era, but that those intolerant people will try and hurt them. They will actively try and hurt trans people and every other group living under the rainbow flag. Now, this is not true, of course. There are very few people in this country that would physically hurt an LGBT person or even verbally assault them, because most people don't really care. Most Americans don't care at all at this point what a person does behind closed doors. And I think increasingly, most gay men and women they want to be left alone. They just want people to treat them like normal Americans. But that's not what the LGBT activists and community want. The LGBT community wants to present themselves as a different group, as special, as oppressed. And that's the point of Pride Month. The entire premise of Pride Month is really to assert the gay community as a victim class that is unafraid of the oppression that they regularly tell us they face. And look, the gay community was a victim of shaming and even violence in the 70s and 80s. There's no question. But since then, tolerance for LGBT people has increased dramatically to a point where even those who may disagree with it are afraid to speak out in fear of being attacked as homophobic or intolerant. So they do the month-long LGBT festival every year in June, and there are parades and celebrations all over the country, and many people, not just the LGBT community, join in the celebration because it's fun. The allies are straight people who are friendly and support the political agenda of the LGBT community, and they participate in these celebrations too, particularly millennial women who are sort of the leaders of identity politics in this country. That's why you see gay pride flags in classrooms. It's often not the gays who want those symbols displayed. It's young liberal women. They are the allies, right? But the ultimate question, though, is whether any of this is necessary. The thinking goes that if the gay community and its allies publicly stand up and say, we're here, we're queer, that will lead to heightened tolerance among the American people, particularly children who the LGBT people assume are subjected to anti-LGBT ideas at home and among their friends. So the assumption is that intolerance and hate, as they like to call it, is far more widespread than it actually is. But that's how they maintain their support, right? The support for the activists and the activist base, they insist that everyone is against them and out to get them. It's like drag queen story time, right? Drag queen story time is probably the best example of the LGBT movement and millennial women trying to fight back against intolerance, so-called intolerance, in the gay community. And the drag queen goes to a library of some other public place, and women take their kids, and the drag queens read to them. And that's supposed to increase the acceptance that kids have towards those who are different. Of course, I've always had a couple questions about drag queen story time. First, why are these drag queens insistent on reading to kids? I've never understood that. And second, do the kids even understand what's happening? Do they understand that this is a man dressed up like a flamboyant character, or do they think it's just a woman with bad makeup reading them books? Because, look, I had no idea what a drag queen was until I was a teenager. No idea. I remember assuming that the type of people I saw in drag on billboards and stuff were just on TV were just very strange women. That's what I sincerely believed when I was young. How would a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, because those are the ages that are going to these things, how would they know what was going on? And of course, this leads us to the drag shows, which have been put on practically everywhere, army facilities, schools, and the government up till recently endorsed these or encouraged these kind of things. You may have heard about the recent story about the California school that hired a BDSM trainer from a trans surgery clinic to speak for kids. And as you might expect, the parents freaked out. But the schools are working independently from the parents because in their view, the parents are intolerant and unaccepting of these sexual ideas and concepts and therefore don't even need to be consulted. The schools view parents as the bad guys, and the schools want to do everything they can, especially in the progressive states, to engage in what seems like encouragement to do things like transition and talk children into considering, you may be the wrong gender, or you may be lesbian or gay or gender confused in some way, while at the same time hiding things like a child using new pronouns or using a different name from the parents. Because of course the parents are intolerant and will abuse their kids if they come out. That's the mindset that the LGBT movement has. And it goes back to a time when parents would do things like kick their kids out of their homes or abuse them if they came out. But there's no evidence that this is happening en masse today because people are much more tolerant than they were 30 years ago to gays. But pride is a big priority for these educators for whatever reason. They view this as being the new civil rights movement, when in fact it's an attempt to promote an ideology that says that the world and America is very intolerant, where gays are persecuted and victims are hated, right? They're victims of hatred. And you can't solely blame the teachers. We know that identity politics, whether it's gender ideology or critical race theory, is popular among educators, but it's really the activists, the people who organize the pride parades and drag queen reading events. They're the ones pushing these activities. Now, the hope should be that someday we don't need pride parades, right? That everyone will be accepting of gays and lesbians, and an individual no longer need to be proud of their sexual identity because it will all be normalized. But if the LGBTQ activists and the educators believe that parents can be shamed and cajoled into widespread acceptance of kids being exposed to this stuff, they are mistaken. Because this kind of thing is not normal in the eyes of most Americans, and no amount of attempted normalization in schools or at parades or in movies and TV shows will ever make parents want their kids to grow up trans. It's a very difficult life. If you are afflicted with gender dysphoria and the fears that educators and activists are encouraging, not just acceptance, but consideration of transgenderism as a potential road for kids to explore, not to mention the fact that the science on kids and transgenderism isn't even close to being settled. There are studies that reach opposite conclusions for the reasons for gender dysphoria and the dangers of transitioning. It's important that we have all the facts at our disposal before we let activists and millennial educators or politicians lead us in that direction. And again, acceptance is one thing. Promotion of these ideas with the threat of ostracization, if you don't accept them, is absolutely unwarranted. And we saw the Trump administration will not hesitate to use this as a political issue because they understand that Americans don't like the idea of kids being exposed to this kind of stuff. You don't have to like it, but transgenderism is nowhere near the American mainstream at this point. And I think as long as the Democrats succumb to the LGBT agenda, and it is an agenda, they'll continue to suffer the consequences. Although they have been getting the message recently, I think they've been far more quiet in their support. They've spoken out against transgender kids in sports. And as we have also seen, businesses and others have scaled back their efforts to appeal to the woke left. The other story you have from the weekend is Ukraine's drone attack on Russia from thousands of miles inside Russian territory. These were strikes on Russian Air Force bases, planes. Neither Russia nor the rest of the world were expecting this kind of successful attack from Ukraine, but I think it puts the war in a new perspective, because the assumption has always been that Ukraine will eventually lose this war because they can't stand up to the overwhelming numbers of the Russian army. But this suggests that a lot of us underestimated their abilities and that Ukraine is willing to do what it takes to win the war and that they think they can win the war. And this complicates President Trump's strategy as he tries to get Russia to the negotiating table, which he has been unsuccessful at thus far because, as I have said, I don't think Russia wants the war to end. And this attack suggests that Ukraine isn't that interested in doing so either. But it is certainly a humiliating moment for Vladimir Putin that I think will further extend the war. So far, this has served as a major embarrassment for Trump, who thought the process would be easy, and yet he hasn't been able to get the two sides to sit down at the table, even sit down. I think that Trump sees the war ending as a legacy item for himself. I think he cares much more about that legacy item and getting credit than the peace it could achieve. Yes, we all would like the hostilities to end, but you can't end a war when the two nations fighting it both want to win it very, very badly, and it's an existential war. I'm Dan Joseph. This is Bite Size Politics. I've been a sporadic character when it comes to the days that I put up the latest podcast. It will get back to normal. Please subscribe. Go to my YouTube page and subscribe there. I post each new podcast there as well. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Be honest. I can take it, but limit your personal attacks, please. I'll see you Thursday.